Deep within the collapsed ruins of what was once Fortress Galanthor, beneath countless tons of rockcrete and twisted metal, something waits in the darkness. The fortress fell 5,750 years ago, brought down not by enemy action, but by the slow, inexorable decay of time itself. The world it once guarded has long since been abandoned, its strategic value lost to the shifting tides of galactic warfare. The Imperial Guard regiments that once manned its walls are dust. The Space Marine chapter, that claimed it as an outpost, has reorganized 3 times. Their heraldry changed, their battle honors rewritten. Even the star charts that once showed this world as a vital link in the Imperium's defenses now mark it as nothing more than a footnote. A dead rock orbiting a dying sun in the unfashionable backwaters of the galaxy. But in the deepest vaults of that ruined fortress, sealed behind walls of ceramite and adamantium that have somehow endured the passage of millennia, a warrior sleeps. Not the sleep of death, though death would perhaps be kinder. This is the sleep of stasis, a twilight existence between consciousness and oblivion, where time loses all meaning and the universe itself seems to hold its breath. Inside an armored sarcophagus that stands nearly 4 meters tall, a space marine rests, or rather, what remains of one. His body was shattered in battle long ago, bones pulverized, organs ruptured beyond the considerable healing abilities of Astartes' physiology. Any normal human would have died instantly from such wounds. Even most space marines would have succumbed. But this warrior was too valuable to lose, his experience too great, his tactical acumen too refined, and so the tech marines of his chapter made a choice that would define the rest of his existence. They entombed him in a Dreadnought. The Castroferum pattern. Mark V that houses his broken form is a masterwork of ancient technology, a fusion of weapons platform and life support system that has kept him alive far longer than any mortal span. Its armor is thick ceramite plating over an adamantium skeleton, proof against all but the heaviest weapons. Its limbs are powered by thermic reactors and servo motors that grant it strength far exceeding anything a flesh and blood warrior could manage. Its right arm terminates in a massive power fist, capable of crushing tank armor like tinfoil. Its left mounts an assault cannon, a rotary weapon that can spit out hundreds of mass-reactive shells per minute. Every surface is covered in purity seals and litanies of hate, prayers to the Emperor inscribed in High Gothic across panels that have witnessed countless battles. But the warrior inside sees none of this. He floats in darkness, suspended in amniotic fluid that fills the sarcophagus, tubes and cables connecting his ruined body to the machine that has become his new flesh. Neural interfaces jack directly into his brain, allowing him to feel the Dreadnought's sensors as his own eyes, to move its limbs as extensions of his will. But for now, those connections are dormant. The warrior sleeps, locked in stasis, his mind wandering through landscapes of memory and dream, where past battles blend together into an endless tapestry of war. He does not know that his chapter no longer exists as it once did. He does not know that the fortress he was defending has crumbled to ruin. He does not know that the very wars he fought in are now considered ancient history, studied by lexicanums as relics of a different age. Time has no meaning in the stasis vault. For him, it might as well have been yesterday that he last walked as a whole man, felt sunlight on his face, tasted food, heard the voices of his battle brothers without the mechanical distortion of Vox speakers. Or it might have been 1,000,000 years ago. In the darkness of suspended animation, there is no way to tell. The systems that maintain his sleep are powered by a generator buried even deeper in the fortress ruins, a reactor that was built to last 10,000 years. It still functions, though barely. Its output, a fraction of what it once was. But it provides enough power to keep the stasis field active, to keep the amniotic fluid circulating, to keep the warrior's broken heart beating its slow, measured rhythm. 1 beat every 10 seconds, 6 beats per minute, 360 beats per hour. The mathematics of near death, calculated to preserve life without truly living it. Around the sarcophagus, the chamber is a shrine to a forgotten age. Banners hang from the walls, their colors faded by time to unrecognizable shades of gray. Suits of power armor stand in alcoves like silent sentinels, their occupants long since departed. Weapons rest in honored positions. Bolt pistols and chainswords that last spoke in battles whose names are no longer remembered. The tech marines who once tended this place with reverent care are gone, their duties abandoned when the fortress was evacuated. No one has set foot in this chamber for thousands of years. No one has checked the sacred oils, recited the prayers of maintenance, or performed the rituals that the machine cult demands. And yet the Dreadnought endures. It was built to last, constructed with technologies that the Imperium can no longer fully replicate. Every component is a masterwork, every circuit board hand-blessed by the Adeptus Mechanicus, every connection point sealed with prayers and sacred unguents. Even now, after millennia of neglect, it continues to function. The warrior inside continues to sleep, waiting for a summons that will never come from a chapter that has forgotten he exists. This is what it means to be a Dreadnought in the 41st millennium, to be preserved not out of mercy, but because you are too useful to discard. To be honored not as a person, but as a weapon. To sleep in darkness, your memories fading like old photographs, your sense of self eroding grain by grain until you can no longer remember what it felt like to be human. Some Dreadnoughts remain active for only a few centuries before madness claims them or their systems finally fail. Others, like Bjorn, the fell-handed of the Space Wolves, have endured for more than 10,000 years, their minds somehow maintaining coherence across spans of time that would drive ordinary humans insane. This particular warrior has slept for 5,750 years. He went into stasis when the Imperium was still recovering from the Horus Heresy, when the wounds of that great civil war were still fresh and bleeding. He fought in battles whose locations no longer appear on any current star chart. He served under commanders whose names have been lost to history, and now he waits in his tomb of metal and ceramite, unconscious of the passage of time, unaware that the galaxy has moved on without him. But the galaxy, as it so often does, is about to deliver a rude awakening. The nature of Dreadnoughts, walking tombs of heroes. To understand what the Orks have found, we must first understand what a Dreadnought truly is. On the surface, they appear to be nothing more than weapons platforms, armored walkers designed to bring overwhelming firepower to bear on the battlefield. And in a purely tactical sense, that is accurate. A Dreadnought is indeed a walking tank, bristling with weapons that can shred infantry and punch through armor with equal efficiency. But to see them as merely machines is to miss the fundamental tragedy of their existence. A Dreadnought is a tomb with a pulse, a prison made of adamantium and ceramite, a last-ditch effort to preserve warriors too valuable to lose, too broken to save, too stubborn to die. The process of becoming a Dreadnought begins with catastrophic injury, not the kind of wound that can be healed by the apothecaries of a Space Marine chapter, but damage so severe that the warrior's body is functionally destroyed. Shattered bones that cannot be set, organs liquefied by explosive impact, spines severed beyond the capacity of even Astartes' physiology to repair. In such cases, when an ordinary Space Marine would be granted the Emperor's Peace, with a bolt round to the head, the greatest heroes are given what the chapter considers an honor. They are interred in a Dreadnought sarcophagus, their ruined bodies wired into a machine that will keep them alive and fighting for centuries, possibly millennia to come. The sarcophagus itself is a miracle of technology, a sealed environment filled with thick, oily amniotic fluid that sustains the pilot's remaining organic tissues. The warrior floats in this fluid, breathing it through lungs that may be all that remains functional of their original respiratory system. Tubes and cables penetrate their flesh, connecting directly to major organs and the spinal column. Neural interface ports jack into the brain itself, creating a direct link between the pilot's thoughts and the Dreadnought's systems. Through these connections, the pilot can see through the Dreadnought's optical sensors, hear through its audio pickups, feel through its tactile sensors. They can move its limbs with their thoughts, fire its weapons with an act of will, walk and fight as though the massive armored shell were their own body. But this connection comes at a terrible price. The human brain was not designed to interface with a machine, to process sensory input from optical sensors instead of eyes, to control limbs made of steel instead of flesh. The cognitive load is immense, creating mental stress that can manifest as confusion, lethargy, dyschronometria, or in the worst cases, complete psychotic breaks. Many dreadnoughts, especially newly interred pilots, struggle to distinguish between their memories of having a body and the reality of their mechanical existence. They may try to perform actions their dreadnought chassis cannot replicate, like gesturing with a hand that is now a power fist, or attempting to taste food with a mouth that no longer exists. This psychological burden is why dreadnoughts spend most of their existence in stasis sleep. The tech marines who maintain them will awaken a dreadnought for battle, for important counsel, or when the chapter needs the wisdom of its ancient heroes. But once their immediate purpose is served, they are returned to their sepulchres and placed back into suspension, their consciousness shut down, their systems powered to minimal levels. The sleep can last for decades, centuries, even millennia in some cases. During this sleep, the pilot exists in a strange twilight state. They are not truly conscious, but neither are they completely unconscious. Their minds drift through landscapes of memory and dream, reliving battles fought long ago, conversations with brothers who have been dead for generations, moments of triumph and tragedy that blur together until it becomes impossible to distinguish memory from imagination. Some dreadnoughts report that they can sense other sleeping pilots during this time, as though their disembodied minds are able to communicate across the veil of stasis. They speak of hearing whispers in the darkness, of feeling the presence of other ancient warriors, of sharing dreams with dreadnoughts they have never met in the waking world. And with each awakening, they lose a little bit more of who they were. Memories fade, eroded by time and the strain of interfacing with the dreadnought. Personalities flatten, the vibrant complexity of human emotion reduced to the simple directives of duty and warfare. Some dreadnoughts become eerily calm, their voices devoid of inflection, their responses to situations coldly tactical. Others swing in the opposite direction, becoming increasingly volatile and aggressive, their only remaining passion channeled entirely into violence. A few rare individuals, like Bjorn the Fell-Handed, somehow maintain their sanity and personality across millennia of service. But they are the exception, not the rule. The physical toll is equally devastating. Although the amniotic fluid preserves the pilot's remaining tissues, it cannot reverse the effects of aging or repair damage that accumulates over time. The neural interfaces gradually degrade, requiring increasingly aggressive maintenance. The organic components of the pilot's brain slowly deteriorate, neurons dying and never being replaced. Eventually, every dreadnought reaches a point where the fusion of flesh and machine can no longer be maintained. Some die when their last functioning organ finally gives out. Others are destroyed in battle, the sarcophagus breached, the pilot exposed to the hostile environment outside. And a few, the truly ancient ones, simply fade away, their consciousness dissipating like morning mist until nothing remains but an empty shell. The construction of a dreadnought chassis is itself a lost art. The Imperium can no longer manufacture these machines from scratch, with anything approaching the quality of older patterns. The knowledge of how to build the sophisticated neural interfaces, the advanced life support systems, the powerful thermic reactors has been largely lost in the 10,000 years since the Horus Heresy. What dreadnoughts exist are relics, maintained through careful husbandry and the scavenging of parts from chassis that can no longer be salvaged. When a dreadnought is destroyed, its chapter will fight with desperate ferocity to recover even fragments of the sarcophagus, hoping to salvage components that can be used to maintain other dreadnoughts in their arsenal. This scarcity makes dreadnoughts incredibly precious. Chapters that possess many of these ancient war machines guard them jealously, awakening them only when absolutely necessary. The Iron Hands chapter, for example, lost the majority of their dreadnoughts during the drop site massacre on Istvan V at the beginning of the Horus heresy. They were never able to replace these losses and maintain relatively few dreadnoughts compared to other chapters, making each one exponentially more valuable. The most common pattern of dreadnought in the 41st millennium is the Castroferum, specifically the Mark IV and Mark V variants manufactured on Mars. These are shorter and more compact than the ancient Contemptor pattern dreadnoughts that date back to the Great Crusade, designed for versatility in confined environments like boarding actions, tunnel fighting, and urban warfare. Their low profile and adaptable weapon mounts make them suitable for a wide range of tactical situations. They can be armed with anything from assault cannons and heavy flamers to lascannons and missile launchers, their loadouts customized for specific threats. But regardless of pattern or armament, every dreadnought represents the same fundamental compromise, preserving the mind at the cost of the body, extending life at the price of true living, honoring service by making it eternal and inescapable. To be a dreadnought is to be simultaneously revered and pitied, feared and honored, a walking reminder that in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, even death is not sufficient to release a warrior from their duty. The oldest known dreadnought still in active service is Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves, interred in the year 934 Pon, M31, during the Proxima Rebellion. That makes him over 10,000 years old, a living link to the Imperium's founding era. He personally knew the Primarch Leman Russ, fought in the Horus heresy, witnessed the Emperor walk among men before being entombed on the Golden Throne. The Space Wolves wake him only once each century, or when the chapter faces a threat so severe that they need his ancient wisdom and experience. Even after all these millennia, Bjorn has somehow maintained his sanity and sense of self, though he admits that the loneliness cuts deeper than any blade, and he still harbors intense feelings of rejection from when Russ departed without him. Other dreadnoughts have not been so fortunate. Ancient Rylanor of the Emperor's Children remained pure even after his chapter fell to chaos during the Horus heresy, eventually sacrificing himself in a final act of defiance against corruption. Murderfang of the Space Wolves has gone completely feral, driven by uncontrollable rage that makes him as dangerous to allies as to enemies. The chapters wake him only when they need pure, unthinking violence, then immediately return him to stasis before he can turn on his own brothers. These are the extremes of the dreadnought experience. But most fall somewhere in between, slowly eroding over the centuries, losing pieces of themselves with each awakening until they are more machine than man, weapons that can think but can barely remember what it felt like to be human. They fight on because they must, because they were built to fight, because they have forgotten how to do anything else. And they sleep in their sepulchres, dreaming of battles that may have never happened, of brothers whose faces they can no longer recall, of a life they can barely remember living. This is what waits in the darkness beneath Fortress Galanthor, not just a war machine, but a tragedy in ceramite and steel, a hero who has been sleeping for nearly 6 millennia, preserved by technology he does not understand, waiting for a summons that will never come. His chapter has moved on. The Imperium has forgotten him. The galaxy has changed beyond recognition, and now the Orks are coming. 5,750 years of silence, the long sleep. To grasp the true weight of the time this dreadnought has spent in stasis, we must consider what the galaxy was like when he last walked conscious, what wars were being fought, what threats loomed on the horizon. 5,750 years is not merely a long time. It is an almost incomprehensible span, a gulf of centuries across which civilizations rise and fall, stars are born and die, and the very fabric of imperial society transforms beyond recognition. When this warrior was first interred in his Dreadnought sarcophagus, the Horus heresy was still a recent memory, a wound that had not yet scarred over. The Imperium was still reeling from the betrayal of half the legions Astartes, still counting the cost of a civil war that had nearly destroyed humanity's greatest empire. The Emperor was already on the Golden Throne, his physical form broken, but his psychic might still holding the Astronomicon steady, that great lighthouse in the warp that allowed for interstellar navigation. But the full implications of his entombment were not yet understood. The imperial truth, which had denied the existence of gods and championed reason over superstition, was giving way to the imperial cult, the worship of the emperor as a divine being. The Space Marine legions were in the process of being broken down into chapters, the reforms instituted by Robert Guilliman's Codex Astartes, reshaping the very nature of the Adeptus Astartes. Where once there had been 18 legions of tens of thousands of warriors each, now there would be hundreds of chapters of 1,000 each, spread across the galaxy to prevent any single commander from wielding the kind of power that had allowed Horus to nearly topple the Imperium. These changes were controversial, resisted by some chapters who viewed them as an insult to their traditions, but they were gradually taking hold. The wars being fought in that era were brutal affairs, the Imperium still purging worlds that had sided with the traitor legions, still hunting down remnants of Horus's forces who had fled into the warp after their defeat at Terra. The galaxy was a more comprehensible place then, the threats more clearly defined. There were traitors to be punished, Xenos to be exterminated, and the light of the Astronomicon to guide the Imperium's expansion. The optimism of the Great Crusade was dead, but there was still a sense that the Imperium could recover, could rebuild, could emerge from the ashes of the heresy stronger than before. That was the world the Dreadnought left behind when he entered stasis. The world he would wake to, if he ever woke, would be almost unrecognizable. In the 5,750 years he has slept, entire sectors of the galaxy have been conquered and lost and reconquered. Xenos empires have risen and been crushed. New chapters have been founded, fought with distinction, and been destroyed to the last man. The Imperium has fought off dozens of black crusades from the Eye of Terror, each one led by Abaddon the Despoiler, the War Master of Chaos, who seeks to finish what Horus started. The Tyranids have arrived from beyond the galactic rim, bringing with them a hunger that threatens to devour all biomass in the galaxy. The political landscape of the Imperium has calcified into the rigid, hidebound theocracy that characterizes the 41st millennium. The imperial truth is long dead, replaced by fanatical devotion to the God Emperor. The Adeptus Mechanicus has consolidated its control over all technological knowledge, declaring innovation to be heresy and maintaining their power through zealous control of the sacred STCs, the standard template constructs that contain the designs for everything from laserguns to starships. The Inquisition has grown from a nascent organization into a vast apparatus of paranoia and persecution, its agents wielding authority that can override planetary governors and even chapter masters. The Imperium's military strength has been ground down by 10,000 years of continuous warfare. The mighty Titan legions that once strode across battlefields in their thousands now exist in handfuls, each god machine a priceless relic that takes centuries to construct. The Imperial Navy patrols a galaxy that has become increasingly hostile, facing enemies on all fronts with ships that are centuries or millennia old, maintained through ritual and prayer as much as actual understanding of their function. The Imperial Guard musters trillions of soldiers, but even these vast numbers are barely sufficient to hold the line against the horrors that assail humanity from all directions. for the Dreadnought sleeping in the ruins of Fortress Galanthor. All of this is unknown. He exists in a bubble of stasis, his last waking memories frozen in a time that no longer exists. He remembers brothers who have been dust for 5 millennia. He remembers battles fought on worlds that have since been scoured clean of all life by exterminatus, or consumed by tyrannid hive fleets. He remembers oaths sworn to a chapter master whose name has been forgotten by everyone except the most dedicated lexicanums. He remembers what it felt like to walk, to run, to feel wind on his face and sun on his skin, sensations he will never experience again, even if he wakes. The amniotic fluid in which he floats has taken on the properties of time itself, thick and viscous, pressing in on all sides, isolating him from the universe. His broken body drifts in this suspension, neither alive in any meaningful sense nor truly dead. His twin hearts beat their slow rhythm, pumping blood that is more chemical preservative than plasma. His lungs draw in the amniotic fluid, extracting oxygen from it in a process that feels nothing like true breathing. His brain, that most complex and mysterious organ, maintains the bare minimum of activity necessary to preserve neural pathways and prevent complete brain death. But beneath the surface of this minimal biological function, deeper patterns emerge. The dreams of a dreadnought in stasis are not like the dreams of living men. They are not the random firing of neurons processing the day's experiences and consolidating memories. They are something stranger, more fragmentary, haunted by the machinery to which the dreamer is connected. Some dreadnoughts report that during stasis, they can feel the machine spirit of their chassis, a presence that is neither truly alive nor truly mechanical, an emergent property of the dreadnought systems that seems to possess a rudimentary consciousness of its own. In these dreams, the warrior might walk battlefields that never were, fighting enemies that blend together from multiple conflicts into composite nightmares. He might have conversations with brothers who died centuries ago, their words carrying wisdom or warnings that make no sense upon waking. He might experience moments of profound clarity where he understands the true nature of his existence, the tragedy of his endless service, only to have that understanding slip away like water through his fingers when consciousness fades again. And through it all, there is the sense of other dreadnoughts sleeping nearby, other minds drifting in the same dark sea, sometimes close enough to touch, sometimes infinitely distant. Time means nothing in this state. A dream that feels like it lasts for hours might occupy only seconds of external time. Conversely, what seems like a moment of confusion might span decades. The warrior has no way of knowing that centuries are passing in the world outside his sarcophagus. He has no awareness that his chapter has abandoned the fortress, that the systems maintaining his stasis are running on emergency power, that the galaxy has moved on without him. He simply is, existing in an eternal now that stretches in all directions without beginning or end. But even stasis fields cannot perfectly preserve biological tissue forever. With each passing year, microscopic changes accumulate. Neurons die, their connections lost forever. The neural interfaces develop infinitesimal degradation, their conductivity decreasing by fractions of a percent. The organic tissues that the amniotic fluid was designed to preserve slowly break down at the molecular level, despite all the technological miracles employed to prevent exactly this. The warrior is dying, has been dying for millennia, but at such a glacial pace that it will take thousands of years more before the process reaches its inevitable conclusion. This is the fate of all dreadnoughts who survive long enough. They do not age in the traditional sense, but they erode, worn down by the passage of time itself. The greatest heroes of the Imperium, preserved as weapons to fight in an endless war, gradually losing pieces of themselves until nothing remains but a shadow of who they once were. And throughout it all, they sleep, dreaming dreams that are not quite dreams, existing in a state that is not quite life, serving an emperor who may or may not be aware of their sacrifice. For 5,750 years, this particular warrior has endured. Through rises and falls of civilizations, through wars that consumed entire sectors, through the slow decay of the Imperium, from the bright hope of the Great Crusade to the grim darkness of the 41st Millennium, he has been forgotten by history, overlooked by the chapter that once considered him a hero, abandoned in a tomb of rockcrete and steel that itself is crumbling into dust. And still he sleeps on, unaware that his long rest is about to be disturbed in the most violent way imaginable. Because above the ruins of Fortress Galanthor, the sky has turned green. The Orks, green tide and scavengers supreme. To understand what is about to happen to our sleeping Dreadnought, we must first understand the nature of Orks, those savage, brutal, and oddly cheerful Xenos who have plagued the galaxy for as long as anyone can remember. They are a contradiction wrapped in green skin, somehow both the most numerous and most underestimated threat in the 41st millennium. Individually, an Ork is dangerous but manageable. Collectively, they are capable of overrunning entire sectors, sweeping aside Imperial defenses like a green tide that swallows everything in its path. Orks are not the product of natural evolution. They are, like so many of the galaxy's horrors, a weapon created during the War in Heaven, that ancient conflict between the Old Ones and the Necrontyre that predates human civilization by millions of years. The Old Ones, desperate for soldiers to fight against the increasingly powerful Satan and their Necron servants, engineered the Orks as the perfect warriors. They gave them incredible resilience, prodigious strength, and an innate love of violence that would ensure they never tired of warfare. They encoded technological knowledge directly into Ork DNA, creating specialist castes who would instinctively know how to build weapons, vehicles, and war machines. And they gave them a Gestalt psychic field, a collective consciousness that would grow stronger as more Orks gathered together, eventually reaching a critical mass that would trigger what the Greenskins call the Great Crusade. But then the War in Heaven ended. The Old Ones disappeared or were destroyed, and their perfect soldiers were left behind to spread across the galaxy like an infestation. Without direction or purpose, the Orks simply did what they were created to do: fight. They fought each other when no other enemies were available, their endless conflicts creating a self-sustaining cycle of violence that has persisted for millions of years. They are a perpetual apocalypse, a threat that can never be truly eradicated because they reproduce through spores, microscopic organisms released by Orks when they die, that eventually grow into new greenskins. You cannot kill all the Orks on a world, because even if you kill every visible greenskin, their spores will have already taken root, and within a few years a new generation will emerge. Orks are physiologically remarkable. They share traits of both animals and fungi, a biological impossibility that makes sense only through the lens of their artificial origins. They possess a skeletal structure, muscular system, and organs similar to many animal species, but they reproduce through spore generation, like fungi. They photosynthesize, drawing energy from light through the chlorophyll in their skin, which is why they are green and why they can survive on minimal food even when fighting constant battles. Their biology is incredibly robust, capable of regenerating from wounds that would kill most other species. An Ork can survive losing limbs, having organs removed, even catastrophic head trauma. As long as their brain remains mostly intact, they feel pain but seem to enjoy it, viewing injuries as proof that they are experiencing a proper fight. Psychologically, Orks are dominated by the Great Crusade, that Gestalt psychic field that connects all greenskins. This field is not like the psychic power of psychers or the connection that Space Marines have with the Emperor. It is a collaborative, collective effect, meaning that individual orcs have virtually no psychic ability. But when enough orcs gather in one place, their combined psychic presence begins to warp reality in subtle but significant ways. This is the source of much orc technology, machines that by all rights should not function but somehow do because enough orcs believe they will. The nature of this psychic field is hotly debated among Imperial scholars. The dominant theory, promoted by the Adeptus Mechanicus, is that orc technology actually does work based on sound engineering principles, but is enhanced and sometimes enabled by the Gestalt field. A mechboy's shooter is not just a pile of scrap metal held together by belief. It is a functional, if crude, weapon that uses the psychic field to paper over inefficiencies and impossibilities in its construction. The classic example is that red orc vehicles actually do go faster, not because the color red has any inherent properties that affect velocity, but because orcs believe red vehicles go faster, and their collective belief makes it so through psychic manipulation of reality. This relationship between belief and reality is what makes orcs so dangerous and so unpredictable. An orc warboss might wield a power claw that should be too heavy to lift and too unstable to use effectively, but his absolute confidence in his own strength and the weapon's deadliness makes both things true. An orc pilot might fly a ramshackle fighter craft held together with duct tape and prayer that should disintegrate the moment it hits atmosphere, but his conviction that it will fly keeps it airborne. The more orcs that believe in something, the more likely it is to actually happen, creating a feedback loop that can produce genuinely miraculous results. This psychic effect scales with numbers. A lone orc is barely more capable than his raw physical abilities would suggest. A mob of orcs begins to exhibit coordination and tactical thinking that individual greenskins should not possess. A warband of thousands starts to show genuine strategic acumen, with warbosses making complex decisions about logistics and long-term planning. And when a truly massive force, a proper Great Crusade, gets underway, the psychic field becomes powerful enough to affect enemy morale, disable certain types of psychic abilities, and even manifest as visible phenomena, like the green lightning that sometimes crackles around orc weapons. Orc society is remarkably simple, at least on the surface. Might makes right, and the biggest orc is always in charge. Warbosses rise to power by beating other orcs into submission, either literally through physical violence or figuratively by demonstrating superior cunning or success in battle. These warbosses then attract followers, other orcs who see them as the best chance for a good fight, and these followers form warbands. Warbands compete and conflict with each other constantly, with successful warbosses growing larger and more powerful as they subsume the followers of defeated rivals. When a warboss becomes truly powerful, when he has unified enough warbands under his banner and demonstrated sufficient brutality and cunning, something changes. The Gestalt psychic field responds to his dominance, amplifying his already formidable presence and drawing even more orcs to him, like moths to a flame. This is when a great crusade begins. That terrifying phenomenon where millions or even billions of orcs unite under a single leader and sweep across entire sectors of the galaxy, unstoppable in their momentum. But it is orc technology that will be most relevant to our sleeping Dreadnought, and specifically their approach to salvage and looting. Orcs are the supreme scavengers of the 41st Millennium. They will take anything that is not nailed down, and if it is nailed down, they will take the nails too. Imperial vehicles, Tau battlesuits, Eldar grav tanks, even Tyrannid bioforms and Necron constructs. All of it is potential material for orc mechboys to improve with their particular brand of engineering. The orcs have an entire subculture dedicated to looting. The Death Skulls clan, in particular, are notorious for their obsession with salvage, believing that blue paint brings good luck, and that stealing from other orcs is not just acceptable, but admirable. They will strip entire battlefields clean, taking everything from spent shell casings to destroyed tanks, all of it fed into the insatiable maw of Ork industry. What they cannot use immediately, they hoard, creating vast scrapyards where mech boys can rummage for components when inspiration strikes. This looting instinct is encoded in Ork genetics, another gift from the Old Ones who designed them to be self-sufficient in hostile territory. Orks can adapt enemy technology to their own use with minimal understanding of how it actually works, relying on instinct and the Gestalt field to make up for gaps in knowledge. A looted Imperial Lehman Rust tank becomes a looted wagon, festooned with additional armor plating, extra guns bolted on wherever they will fit, and enough crude modifications to make tech marines weep. It will be loud, smoky, and horribly unreliable by Imperial standards, but it will work, and more importantly, it will give the Orks operating it a sense of satisfaction that comes from taking the enemy's best and making it their own. Orks have even been known to loot Imperial Titans, those towering god machines that stand as the ultimate expression of Imperial military might. The legendary Ork looter, known as Grabber Gutzbag, supposedly specialized in acquiring these massive war engines, though how he accomplished this feat is unclear and probably involves a lot of things that would make princeps of the Collegia Titanica retire in shame. The very fact that Orks can even conceive of looting a Titan, much less actually do it, speaks to their audacity and complete lack of understanding regarding what should or should not be possible. This brings us back to Fortress Galanthor and the Dreadnought sleeping in its depths. The world was abandoned millennia ago, left to slowly crumble without anyone particularly caring what happened to it. For most of Imperial history, it remained overlooked, too distant to be worth the resources required to resettle it, too poor in strategic value to merit even a garrison. But the galaxy turns, wars shift, and what was once useless can become valuable again. Or in this case, what was once empty can become occupied by the worst possible tenants. An Ork warband has claimed the world. Not a massive great crusade, not yet, but a sizable force nonetheless. Thousands of greenskins under the command of a war boss, whose name translates roughly to Big Mech Zagdruk Iron Teeth. They arrived aboard a ramshackle space hulk, that collection of ships fused together by centuries drifting through the warp, and immediately set about establishing their presence. They built settlements, if the crude collections of scrap metal and fungus can be called such. They established fighting pits where Orks could battle each other for status and entertainment. And they began to explore, because Orks are endlessly curious about anything that might be useful, dangerous, or both. Fortress Galanthor, even in ruins, represents the kind of opportunity that Orks dream about. It is old, which means it might contain ancient technology that even the greenskins recognize as valuable. It is imperial, which means it was built by the Humies, and Orks love nothing more than taking things from their enemies. And most importantly, it is large and complicated, full of dark tunnels and sealed chambers and mysteries that need to be opened with either clever engineering or, failing that, large amounts of explosives. So the Orks have been digging, sending mobs of Gretchen and boys down into the ruins with orders to find anything good and bring it back to the mech boys for evaluation. They have torn through collapsed corridors, bypassed ancient defense systems that long ago ran out of power, and penetrated deeper into the fortress than any Xenos has ever gone before. They have found ammunition stores, the shells long since degraded, but the metals still valuable. They have found vehicles, ancient tanks and transports that the mech boys have already begun tearing apart for components. They have found power armor, bolters, and all manner of Imperial war gear. Most of it badly corroded, but still useful to Orks who do not particularly care about things like factory tolerances or safety regulations. And now, in the deepest levels, they have found something that even they recognize as special. A sealed vault. The doors marked with purity seals and aquilus, the walls themselves vibrating with barely perceptible hum of active power systems. The Orks do not know what is inside, cannot read the Gothic script that warns of sacred contents that must not be disturbed. But they know that when something is locked up that thoroughly, it must be worth taking. And where words and warnings fail to deter, Ork determination and large amounts of explosives will inevitably succeed. The vault is about to be breached, and the Dreadnought's long sleep is about to end. Mech Boys, the mad engineers. To understand what will happen when the Orks finally break into the vault containing our dormant Dreadnought, we must first understand the nature of Mech Boys, those peculiar specialists who serve as the engineers, mechanics, and inventors of Ork society. They are simultaneously the most and least sophisticated technologists in the galaxy, capable of creating weapons and vehicles that work despite violating multiple laws of physics, while having virtually no theoretical understanding of why anything works the way it does. Mech Boys are odd boys, one of several specialized castes within Ork society that are born with specific knowledge encoded directly into their genetic makeup. Unlike regular Orks, who might become skilled at something through practice and experience, Mech Boys emerge from their spore pods already possessing an instinctive understanding of mechanical principles. They look at a pile of scrap metal and see potential, envision what could be built from those components, understand, at a fundamental level, how to turn raw materials into functioning technology. This knowledge is not learned or taught. It is hardwired into their DNA, a gift from the old ones who created the Ork species millions of years ago. But this instinctive knowledge comes with significant limitations. A Mech Boy knows how to build an engine, but could not explain thermodynamics if his life depended on it. He understands that certain configurations of wiring will produce electricity, but has no concept of electrical theory or circuit design. He can look at a broken machine and intuitively grasp what needs to be fixed, but cannot articulate the diagnostic process he used to reach that conclusion. His engineering is pure intuition, backed by the Gestalt psychic field that all Orks share, allowing him to create devices that should not work, but somehow do. Mech Boys use their own specialized language when discussing technology, a jargon that is incomprehensible to anyone except other Mech Boys. They speak of worky bits and gubbins, measure things in units like gajillion, approximately equal to lots, and describe their processes in ways that sound more like magic than engineering. Juice up the engine might mean anything from adding more fuel to completely rebuilding the power plant with components from 3 different sources. Make it more killy is a perfectly valid design specification that other Mech Boys will immediately understand and be able to implement. The physical appearance of Mech Boys tends toward the practical. They are often slightly smaller than regular Orks, trading some raw physical size for increased manual dexterity. Their fingers, while still thick and powerful by human standards, are more nimble than those of typical boys. They accumulate tools the way war bosses accumulate followers, festooning themselves with wrenches, hammers, cutting torches, and devices whose function only they understand. Many Mech Boys incorporate crude cybernetics into their own bodies, replacing limbs with mechanical equivalents that can serve as tools or weapons as the situation demands. The hierarchy of Mech Boys follows the same might makes right principle that governs all Ork society, but with an interesting twist. A Mech Boy's status is determined not just by his size and strength, but by the quality and inventiveness of his creations. A Mech Boy who can build a reliable engine is respected. A Mech Boy who can build a gun that shoots lightning is even more respected. And a Big Mech, the most senior and skilled of all Mech Boys, is someone who can create wonders that other Orks will travel across continents to acquire. Big Mechs are the true masters of Ork technology, individuals who have honed their instinctive knowledge through decades or even centuries of practice. They lead teams of lesser Mech Boys and their apprentices, called spanners, who do the grunt work of maintenance and construction while learning the more advanced techniques that only experience can teach. Big Mechs are capable of creating force fields, teleportation devices, and weapons of such devastating power that they are only deployed when a war boss needs something particularly impressive to be destroyed. They are also responsible for the construction of Ork dreadnoughts, the Def Dreads, and killer cans that are the greenskin equivalent of Imperial dreadnoughts. Ork dreadnoughts are worth examining because they reveal much about mechboy philosophy and engineering approach. Like Imperial dreadnoughts, Def Dreads house a living pilot, usually an Ork who has been so badly injured that he can no longer fight effectively on his own. But where Imperial dreadnoughts are somber affairs, honoring fallen heroes with reverence and care, Ork dreadnoughts are boisterous, violent, and often unwilling participants. Many Orks do not want to be locked into a metal can, no matter how many guns it has, because it means giving up the simple pleasures of Orky life, running around, hitting things with your fists, looting with your own hands. The pilots of Def Dreads are often somewhat mad, driven crazy by being trapped in the machine and taking out their frustration on anything within reach of their power claws. This tells us something important about how mechboys approach the concept of integrating living beings with machines. They are not gentle about it. They are not concerned with the pilot's comfort or long-term well-being. They wire the Ork into the Def Dread with the same approach they would use to install a new engine into a truck. Lots of welding, minimal precision, and an attitude of, it'll probably work. The fact that it does work, that these crude neural interfaces allow the pilot to control the Def Dread's limbs and weapons, is testament to the power of the Gestalt field, making up for deficiencies in actual medical knowledge. When mechboys loot enemy technology, they approach it with a combination of instinct and experimentation. They will take apart Imperial vehicles, Tau battlesuits, Eldar grav tanks, examining the components and trying to understand what does what. Their process is not systematic or methodical in any sense that would be recognizable to Imperial engineers. They will grab pieces at random, hit them with hammers to see if they do anything interesting, wire them into existing Ork machinery to observe the results. Many of these experiments end in catastrophic failure, explosions and fires that kill the mechboys involved and destroy whatever they were working on. But enough succeed that the overall approach remains viable. The Death Skulls clan, with their fetish for blue paint and looting, often employ the most skilled mechboys because they have access to the widest variety of salvaged components. A Death Skull mech might build a truck using an Imperial engine, Tau grav stabilizers, and Ork armor plating, creating a hybrid vehicle that should not function, but somehow does. These looted wagons are prized possessions, their crews constantly adding new weapons and modifications until the original chassis is barely recognizable under layers of additional gubbins. One of the more famous examples of Ork looting genius was when the Death Skulls managed to acquire and improve an Imperial Lehman Russ battle tank. In Imperial hands, a Lehman Russ is a reliable, if unspectacular, main battle tank, armored enough to survive hits from most weapons and armed with a powerful battle cannon. In Ork hands, it became a looted wagon festooned with extra armor plates bolted on at random angles, additional weapons welded to every available surface, and a coat of garish blue paint that the Orks insisted made it lucky. It was louder, smokier, and less accurate than the original. It also had more guns, more speed, and more enthusiasm, which from the Ork perspective made it strictly better. The Orks have even developed a legend about a looter named Grabber Gutzbag, who supposedly specialized in stealing Imperial Titans. How an Ork could possibly loot a god machine that stands 40 meters tall and is protected by void shields is unclear, but Orks insist it happened, which means it probably did, somehow. The very existence of this legend speaks to the Ork mindset. If something seems impossible, try harder and bring more explosives. Mechboys also serve a spiritual role in Ork society, though they would not describe it that way. They are at the heart of spontaneous psychic events that the Greenskins call the Great Crusade phenomenon, where the building of massive war machines seems to trigger a surge in the Gestalt field that draws orcs to the construction site like pilgrims to a shrine. When a big mech begins work on a stomper or gargant, those towering war engines that are the orc equivalent of Imperial titans, something changes in the local psychic environment. Orcs from across the region feel compelled to join the Great Crusade building around that mech's project, contributing their strength and enthusiasm to what becomes as much a religious experience as an engineering project. The mech boys' relationship with the Gestalt psychic field is crucial to understanding how their technology functions. They are not just mechanics, they are conduits for the collective will of all orcs, channeling that psychic energy into the machines they build. When a mech installs a big red button in the cockpit of a looted wagon, and they almost always install a big red button, that button does not necessarily connect to any specific system. But when an orc pushes it, something will happen, because enough orcs believe that big red buttons do things, and the Gestalt field makes that belief reality. This is why orc technology only works reliably for orcs. An Imperial engineer examining an orc shooter would find that it should not be able to fire, that the barrel is not properly aligned, the firing mechanism is missing crucial components, the ammunition feed is backwards. But when an orc pulls the trigger, it shoots because the orc expects it to shoot, and his expectation, multiplied by the expectations of all nearby orcs, creates a psychic effect that forces the weapon to function despite its mechanical impossibilities. Mech boys do not understand this process. They have no theoretical framework for explaining how belief shapes reality, no concept of psychic phenomena or the Gestalt field. They just know that if you build something that looks like it should work, and you believe it will work, and you get enough other orcs to believe it will work, then it does work. This is not engineering, as the Adeptus Mechanicus would recognize it. This is something stranger and more primal, a form of techno-shamanism, where the line between machine and magic blurs until it disappears entirely. The implications of all this for our sleeping Dreadnought are profound. The mech boys, who are about to breach the vault, have never seen an Imperial Dreadnought up close. They have fought against them, certainly, seen them on the battlefield tearing through orc lines with assault cannons and power fists, but they have never had the opportunity to examine one in detail, to take it apart and see how it works, to loot its components for their own projects. The discovery of an intact, or relatively intact, Dreadnought would be like finding an STC for a tech priest, the opportunity of a lifetime. They will approach it with all the subtlety and restraint that orcs are famous for, which is to say, none whatsoever. They will hit it with hammers to see if anything falls off. They will try to pry open the sarcophagus to see what is inside. They will attempt to remove weapons, armor plates, power systems, anything that looks useful or interesting. And in the process, they will inevitably trigger systems that have been dormant for millennia, sending electrical currents through circuits that have not carried power in 5,000 years, waking machine spirits that have slumbered alongside the pilot. The Dreadnought is about to have a very bad day. The discovery. When green meets adamantium. The vault's doors have withstood 5,750 years of neglect, environmental stress, and the slow decay that claims all things in the absence of maintenance. They are massive slabs of ceramite 3 meters thick, set into a frame of reinforced adamantium that was built to last until the heat death of the universe. Purity seals cover every surface, their wax brittle and cracked with age, their parchment yellow and illegible. The aquila emblazoned on the doors has faded until it is barely visible, its proud double-headed eagle reduced to a shadow of wings and talons. But the locks still hold, mag-sealed by technology that predates most of the current Imperium, drawing power from a generator buried so deep in the fortress's foundation that it would take a direct orbital strike to destroy it. The Orks do not care about any of this. They stand before the vault doors in a mob of about 30, a mixture of regular boys, their larger knob commanders, a handful of Gretchen, and most importantly, 3 mech boys, who have been arguing loudly about the best way to breach the seal for the past hour. The lead mech, a particularly scarred individual whose left arm has been replaced by a crude mechanical limb ending in an oversized wrench, gestures emphatically at the doors while explaining his theory about where to put the boom. His name is something that translates roughly to Spark Git Wrench Boss, and he has been working as a spanner for a big mech for the better part of 3 decades, learning the finer points of Ork engineering through trial, error, and numerous explosions. He is not the smartest mech boy in the warband, nor the most skilled, but he has a reputation for being persistent and willing to try solutions that other mechs consider too crazy, even by Ork standards. His mechanical arm is evidence of this. He lost the original in an experiment involving a jury-rigged plasma weapon and insufficient shielding. The fact that he survived the explosion at all is considered proof that he is favored by Gork and Mork, the twin Ork gods. The other 2 mech boys are less distinguished, younger Orks who still have most of their original limbs and fewer scars than Sparkgit. They follow his lead, though they occasionally offer suggestions that get shouted down or, in one memorable case, result in Sparkgit hitting one of them with his wrench hard enough to leave a dent in the Ork's thick skull. The argument is less about the technical merits of various approaches and more about who gets to be in charge of the operation, a question that in Ork society is always resolved through application of superior violence. The regular boys and knobs watching this debate are getting impatient. They have been down in these ruins for days, hauling scrap and loot back to the surface. And this sealed vault represents the promise of something special, something worth all the effort of digging through collapsed corridors and avoiding the occasional still-active defense turret. They want it open now, not after the mechs finish their endless discussion about proper detonation patterns and structural weak points. "Just blow the whole thing up!" shouts one particularly large knob, waving his power claw for emphasis. The gesture sends sparks flying from the weapon's power field, briefly illuminating the dark corridor in electric blue light. "Who cares if we smash up whatever's inside? We can still loot to pieces." Sparkgit turns to glare at the knob, his mechanical eye whirring as it adjusts focus. "Use a git, you know that? You blow it up wrong, the whole ceiling might come down, and then we's all squished. That ain't a proper way for a mech to die. We gotta be careful like." The concept of a mech boy advocating for caution is unusual enough that the other Orks actually pause to consider it. Sparkgit takes advantage of their momentary confusion to pull out what he has been saving for this exact situation, a collection of melter charges, Imperial demolition devices that the Orks looted from a supply depot several months ago. They are cylindrical devices about the size of a human fist, their surfaces covered in high Gothic script, warning of extreme danger and the need for proper handling by certified personnel. The Orks cannot read the warnings, of course, and would not care, even if they could. "See Daisy?" Sparkgit holds up one of the charges triumphantly. "Daisy's proper Humy boom gubbins. We stick 'em on the door, right on them shiny bits where the lock things are, and then we run real fast before they go boom. The door comes down, the ceiling stays up, and we get to see what's inside without getting squished. That's called being clever, that is." The other Orks mutter appreciatively. The plan has the virtue of being simple enough to understand while still involving explosives, which satisfies the fundamental Ork need to blow things up. After a few more minutes of argument about the proper placement of the charges, mostly settled by Sparkgit hitting dissenters with his wrench, the mechs get to work. They place the melter charges in a pattern that probably makes sense if you are an Ork mech boy, operating on instinct and Gestalt psychic intuition. To anyone else, it looks random, charges stuck to the door wherever Sparkgit thinks they might do the most damage. But as he works, something interesting happens. The other Orks watch him, and their collective belief that he knows what he is doing creates a subtle psychic resonance. The Gestalt field responds, flowing through Sparkgit's mechanical arm, guiding his placement with precision that his conscious mind does not possess. By the time he is finished, the charges are positioned in a pattern that would impress an Imperial demolitions expert, targeting the weak points in the door's structure with uncanny accuracy. Of course, SparkGit has no idea he has done this. He just knows the placement feels right, which is how mech boys make most of their technical decisions. He connects a detonator, a device that is mostly wire and duct tape, with a big red button in the center, and retreats to what he considers a safe distance, which is about 15 meters down the corridor. The other orcs pile in behind him, jostling for position to get a good view of the explosion while remaining far enough away to avoid being buried in debris. "Right den," SparkGit announces, his thumb hovering over the detonator button. "On free. 1, 2, free." He mashes the button with enough force to crack the casing. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the melter charges activate simultaneously, their fusion cores reaching critical temperature in microseconds. The heat they generate is intense enough to vaporize adamantium. The molecular bonds of the metal superheated until they simply cease to exist. The doors do not explode outward so much as they cease being doors, transformed into clouds of metallic vapor and droplets of molten metal that rain down across the corridor like fiery snow. The concussive force of the blast picks up several Gretchen and sends them flying down the corridor, screaming all the way. The orcs themselves are pushed back but remain standing, their greater mass and lower center of gravity keeping them anchored. They shield their eyes from the intense light, squinting through their fingers to watch the spectacle. And when the initial blast fades, when the smoke begins to clear and the ringing in their ears subsides to a manageable level, they see that the vault is open. The chamber beyond is dark, lit only by the flickering light of the orcs' torches and the faint glow of emergency lighting that has somehow remained active through millennia of abandonment. The air that rushes out smells of ozone and machine oil, the recycled atmosphere of a sealed environment finally mixing with the outside world. And there, in the center of the chamber, stands the Dreadnought. Even dormant, even covered in 5,000 years of dust and neglect, it is an imposing sight. The Castroferrum pattern chassis stands nearly 4 meters tall, its broad shoulders and armored torso giving it a silhouette that speaks of indomitable strength. The ceramite plating is scuffed and scarred from countless battles, pitted by impacts that would have destroyed lesser machines. The purity seals covering its surface have degraded into unreadable scraps, but there are so many of them that their sheer number suggests this was a warrior of considerable importance. The assault cannon mounted on its left arm is massive, a rotary weapon with 6 barrels arranged in a hexagonal pattern, each capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. The power fist on its right arm is clenched shut, its power field generator inactive but still radiating a sense of latent menace. But it is the sarcophagus that draws the eye, that armored tomb at the center of the Dreadnought that contains what remains of the pilot. It is sealed tight, its surfaces covered in more purity seals and inscriptions in High Gothic that tell the story of a warrior's service. The orcs cannot read the inscriptions, cannot understand that they detail battles fought on worlds that no longer exist, victories won in the name of an emperor who may or may not still live. They just know that it looks important, and anything that looks important is worth looting. "Zorganel," breathes SparkGit, his mechanical eye clicking as it zooms in on the Dreadnought. "That's a proper big stompy thing." "Dat is." The other orcs murmur agreement, impressed despite themselves. They have seen Def Dreads before, of course, their own crude version of walking war machines, but this is something else entirely, something that radiates craftsmanship and power in equal measure. The Dreadnought's very presence seems to fill the chamber, making the orcs feel small and insignificant in a way they do not particularly enjoy. But it also makes them excited, because anything this impressive must be full of useful gubbins that they can strip out and use for their own projects. SparkGit approaches cautiously, his wrench arm extended as if the weapon might somehow protect him from a machine that has not moved in millennia. He circles the Dreadnought slowly, examining it from every angle, his mech boy instincts analyzing its construction and trying to understand how it works. The other mechs follow his lead, while the boys and knobs form a perimeter, weapons ready in case the thing suddenly activates and starts shooting. "Look at all dem pipes and wires," one of the younger mechs says, pointing at the exposed cabling along the Dreadnought's back. "And the armor plates is all thick like. Dis must be a really hard humie for him to put him in some find so tough." Sparkgit grunts agreement, running his mechanical fingers along the seams where the armor plates connect. He finds access panels, their locks long since seized shut, and begins trying to pry them open with his wrench. The metal resists at first, thousands of years of oxidation making it stubborn, but Ork strength combined with crude tools eventually wins out. The panel comes free with a squeal of tortured metal, revealing the internal components beneath. What Sparkgit sees makes his eyes widen in awe. The Dreadnought's internal mechanisms are a marvel of Imperial technology, layers of systems and subsystems working in concert to keep the pilot alive and the war machine functional. He can see the power conduits, thick cables that carry energy from the reactor to the weapons and motive systems. He can see the neural interface cables, thinner lines that disappear into the sarcophagus, where they connect to the pilot's brain and nervous system. He can see hydraulic lines, cooling systems, ammunition feeds, sensor clusters, all of it packed together with an efficiency that speaks to thousands of years of refinement and improvement. To a tech marine of the Adeptus Mechanicus, this would be a religious experience, a glimpse of the Omnissiah's work manifested in perfect mechanical form. To Sparkgit, it is the greatest pile of loot he has ever seen, a treasure trove of components that he can strip out and use to build a dozen different things. His mind is already racing with possibilities, mentally cataloguing what he is seeing and deciding what he wants to take first. "Right, boys," he announces, turning to address the mob. "We's gonna take this thing apart nice and proper. I want the big shooty bits and dose power cables and whatever's making that humming noise. You lot start removing armor plates, careful like so we don't break nothing important. And somebody get me more tools. We's gonna be here a while." The Orks set to work with enthusiasm, their natural talent for dismantling things combining with the mech boys' technical knowledge to create an efficient, if chaotic, salvage operation. They attack the Dreadnought from multiple angles, prying off armor plates, disconnecting cables, removing components that look valuable or interesting. The chamber fills with the sound of metal on metal, the grunts of exertion from Orks wrestling with stubborn bolts, the occasional curse when someone drops a heavy piece of equipment on their foot. And through it all, the Dreadnought remains still and silent, its systems dark, its pilot deep in stasis sleep. The amniotic fluid in the sarcophagus continues to circulate, kept moving by pumps that draw power from the emergency generator far below. The neural interfaces maintain their minimal activity, just enough to prevent complete brain death. The warrior inside dreams his endless dreams, unaware that his tomb is being violated by Xenos, who see him not as a hero to be honored, but as a machine to be looted. But Ork engineering, for all its instinctive brilliance, is not precise. And when you start disconnecting components from a machine as complex as a Dreadnought, especially when you do not fully understand what those components do, accidents are inevitable. Sparkgit, in his enthusiasm to remove what he thinks is a particularly interesting power coupling, cuts through a cable that his instincts should have warned him to leave alone. It is not a major system, not something that would cause immediate catastrophic failure, but it is part of the stasis field generator, one of the redundant control circuits that has kept the warrior asleep for 5,000 years. The cable sparks as it is severed, sending an electrical surge through connected systems. Circuit breakers that were designed to prevent exactly this kind of overload fail to activate, their mechanisms frozen by millennia of disuse. The surge propagates through the Dreadnought's power grid, reaching components that have been dormant for longer than most civilizations have existed. And in the sarcophagus, deep in the amniotic fluid, the pilot's neural interfaces receive a jolt of current that should not be there. The stasis field flickers, just for a moment, just for a fraction of a second, but long enough. The warrior's mind, held in perfect suspension between consciousness and oblivion, begins to stir. Neurons that have not fired in millennia suddenly activate, cascading through pathways that have been silent for so long that they have almost been forgotten. Thoughts begin to form, fragmented and confused, reaching for consciousness, like a drowning man reaching for the surface. And in the darkness of his endless sleep, the Dreadnought begins to wake. The examination. Mech boys at work. The Orks do not immediately notice that anything has changed. They are too focused on their work, too engrossed in the process of taking apart what they have decided is the greatest piece of loot they have ever found. Sparkgit has moved on from the power coupling to the assault cannon, which he has decided must come off first before they can access the really interesting bits underneath. He has recruited 4 other Orks to help him with this task, because the weapon is mounted on a bearing assembly that was designed to support its considerable weight and withstand the recoil forces of sustained fire. Removing it without the proper tools requires creativity, brute force, and a willingness to hit things with increasingly large hammers until they break. "Put your backs into it, you gits!" Sparkgit shouts, his mechanical arm whirring as he applies leverage to what he thinks is the mounting bracket. "The whole thing's got to come off in one piece, or it ain't no good to us." The Orks heave against the assault cannon, their combined strength gradually warping the metal of the mounting assembly. They do not understand the engineering principles involved. Do not know that they are supposed to remove the securing bolts first, or that there are release mechanisms that would make this process trivial if they knew where to look. They just apply force until something gives way, which in this case happens when the entire mounting bracket tears free from the Dreadnought's shoulder with a screech of tortured metal. The assault cannon, suddenly unsupported, pivots downward with enough force to knock 2 of the Orks onto their backs. Sparkgit, quicker to react than his companions, manages to catch it before it hits the ground, though the weight nearly bowls him over. He staggers backward, cursing creatively in the Ork language, until he can set the weapon down in a more controlled manner. "Dare?" he announces proudly, gesturing at the assault cannon like it is a trophy. "That's how you do it. Now we got ourselves a proper big shooter for the boss's battle wagon." While Sparkgit admires his prize, the other mech boys have moved on to different systems. One is working on the power fist, trying to figure out how to activate the power field generator so he can see it work. Another has climbed onto the Dreadnought's back, where he is attempting to access the thermic reactor that powers the entire chassis. He has pried open an access panel and is now staring at the reactor core with the kind of fascination that usually precedes catastrophic accidents in Ork engineering. The reactor is not currently active at full capacity, running on minimal output to maintain the stasis systems, but even at low power, it is a marvel of Imperial technology, a contained fusion reaction generating enough energy to run a small city. "Oi, Sparkgit," the mech on the Dreadnought's back calls down. "Come look at this. It's all glowing and making funny noises." Sparkgit abandons the assault cannon and climbs up to join his colleague, his mechanical arm leaving scorch marks on the Dreadnought's armor plating where it grips for leverage. He peers into the reactor housing, his eyes widening as he sees the soft blue glow of the fusion reaction. To an Ork mech boy, this is like discovering a new color, a phenomenon so outside his normal experience that it takes a moment for his brain to process what he is seeing. "That's," he begins, then pauses, searching for the right words in the limited technical vocabulary available to him. "That's really zogging good. We gotta get this whole thing out and put it in something proper big. Maybe the boss's mega dread, or that stomper we's building." The idea of transplanting an Imperial Dreadnought's reactor into an Ork war machine would horrify any tech marine who heard about it, not least because the reactor is specifically calibrated for the Dreadnought's power requirements and would need extensive modification to work in any other application. But to the mech boys, it is simply a matter of making the worky bits work with different gubbins, a challenge they are confident they can overcome through application of Ork engineering principles. Hit it until it does what you want. Down below, the regular boys have gotten bored with guard duty and have started exploring the rest of the vault. They find storage lockers along the walls, their locks long since rusted shut, but still protecting whatever is inside. One particularly enthusiastic orc decides that the quickest way to open a locker is to shoot it with his shooter, which he does, creating a deafening series of explosions in the confined space and showering his companions with shrapnel. The locker, miraculously, does not explode, though it is now ventilated in ways the original manufacturers never intended. Inside the damaged locker, the orcs find what they have been hoping for: weapons. Not just any weapons, but Imperial bolt guns, the iconic firearms of the Adeptus Astartes. There are a dozen of them, racked vertically, their surfaces covered in dust, but otherwise apparently intact. The orcs immediately claim them, each trying to grab as many as possible before the others can stake their claims, leading to a brief but vigorous scuffle that ends only when a nob intervenes by hitting everyone involved with the flat of his chopper. "DZ is for the boss," the nob announces, gathering up the bolt guns. "We ain't keeping good loot like this for ourselves, unless..." He pauses, considering, then tucks one of the bolt guns into his belt. "Unless we's keeping one or two, on account of we found 'em. That's only fair." The other orcs grumble, but do not argue, recognizing that the nob's logic is unassailable by orc standards. They turn their attention to the other lockers, prying them open with crowbars and power claws, revealing more weapons, some ammunition that is probably still good, and various pieces of equipment whose function they do not understand, but which they take anyway because you never know when something might be useful. Back at the Dreadnought, Sparkgit has made a disturbing discovery. While examining the cables he cut earlier, he has noticed that some of the systems are beginning to activate on their own. Small lights are flickering on across the control panel on the sarcophagus. Indicators that should be dark are glowing amber or red. The humming noise that has been constant since they opened the vault is growing louder, changing pitch in ways that suggest increasing power draw. "Oi," he says, his usual confidence wavering slightly. "I think this thing might be waking up." The other mechs pause in their work to look at him. "What do you mean, waking up?" one asks. "It's a machine. Machines don't wake up." "Deaf dreads do," Sparkgit points out. "And this looks like a Hume deaf dread. Maybe there's still somebody inside. And we's just woke 'em up by messing with all the cables and things." This possibility had not occurred to any of them until now. They have been treating the Dreadnought as an inanimate object, a very valuable pile of loot to be dismantled at their leisure. The idea that it might contain a still living pilot, that it might be capable of fighting back, adds an element of danger that makes the situation simultaneously more worrying and more exciting. "Well," says one of the mechs, with the kind of orky pragmatism that defines their species, "if there is somebody in there, we better finish getting the good bits off before they wake up proper. I ain't letting some angry Hume stop me from getting that shiny reactor." The mech boys redouble their efforts, working with increased urgency now that they know they might be on a deadline. They disconnect more cables, remove more armor plates, strip out more components. Every action sends more feedback through the Dreadnought systems, more electrical surges cascading through circuits that are desperately trying to maintain equilibrium. The stasis field is failing, its power supply compromised, its control mechanisms damaged beyond their ability to self-repair. The pilot's consciousness is rising through the layers of suspension like a swimmer approaching the surface, gathering speed and awareness with each passing moment. Inside the sarcophagus, the warrior's eyes open for the first time in 5,750 years. They are not his original eyes, long since replaced by augmetic implants that interface directly with the Dreadnought's optical sensors. They see nothing at first, just darkness and the faint glow of indicator lights. His mind is still foggy, still trying to piece together where he is and what is happening, struggling to distinguish between the dreams of stasis and the reality of waking. He tries to move and feels the familiar resistance of amniotic fluid, the weight of his body suspended in the sarcophagus. He tries to speak and feels the neural interfaces come alive. his thoughts translating into electronic signals that activate vox speakers he cannot remember having. The first sound that emerges from the Dreadnought is not a word. It is a low, grinding noise, like a machine that has not been used in a very long time, trying to remember how to function. The sound builds in volume, growing from a whisper to a rumble to a roar of hydraulics and servos activating, of power systems routing energy to limbs that have been frozen for millennia. The Orks freeze, their attention snapping to the Dreadnought as it begins to move. The power fist unclenches, its fingers extending with painful slowness, each joint creaking and popping as lubricants that have long since solidified are forced to flow again. The torso begins to rotate, optical sensors swiveling to take in the chamber, processing the scene with centuries-old tactical subroutines that automatically identify friend and foe. And when the warrior's consciousness has risen far enough to truly understand what he is seeing, when the targeting systems have locked onto the Xenos that have violated his tomb, he does the only thing he has ever known how to do. He goes to war. The awakening. Consciousness returns. The first coherent thought the warrior has is a simple one. Where am I? It is not a sophisticated question. It does not delve into philosophy or metaphysics. But after 5,750 years of suspended animation, after countless ages spent dreaming dreams that had no beginning or end, the ability to form any coherent thought at all is remarkable. His mind grasps at the question like a lifeline, using it to anchor himself to reality, to distinguish between the phantoms of memory and the world as it actually exists. The answer comes slowly, filtered through sensory systems that are still booting up, still running through their activation sequences, still trying to reconcile input that does not match anything in their memory banks. His optical sensors come online first, their targeting reticles flickering to life and painting the chamber in shades of green and amber. What he sees makes no sense. Xenos, dozens of them, green-skinned and brutish, their crude features illuminated by flickering torchlight. They are standing all around him, on him, some of them actively pulling components out of his chassis with the kind of casual vandalism that speaks to complete lack of understanding or respect. They are Orks. His tactical database identifies them immediately, cross-referencing their appearance and behavior against thousands of entries from battles fought long ago. Orks, Xenos species, extremely hostile, technologically backward, but numerous and resilient. Threat assessment: moderate individually, severe in groups. Recommended response: immediate and overwhelming violence. But even as his combat protocols activate, even as targeting solutions begin to appear in his vision, another part of his mind is asking different questions. How did the Orks get here? Where is here? Why is he awake? And most pressingly, how long has he been asleep? The chronometer that should answer the last question is not functioning correctly. It displays a number that seems wrong, impossibly large, a figure that suggests he has been inactive for nearly 6 millennia. That cannot be right. He would remember if he had been asleep that long, would feel the weight of those years pressing down on his consciousness. Except he does not remember, does not feel anything except a vague sense of disconnection, like waking from a dream whose details have already begun to fade. He tries to access his personal logs, the records that every Dreadnought maintains of their service and consciousness between battles. The files are corrupted, damaged by time or the interference the Orks have caused, rendering most of them unreadable. He catches fragments, scraps of text that refer to battles and campaigns whose names he does not recognize. The Proxima campaign, the defense of Valentia Prime, the purging of the Black Moons. These are his own memories, his own experiences, but they feel like they belong to someone else, a warrior who lived and fought so long ago that his existence seems more mythical than real. Another thought surfaces, this one more urgent. I need to defend myself. The Orks have not yet realized he is truly awake. They are still working on his chassis, still arguing among themselves about the best way to extract his reactor core. One of them, A particularly ugly specimen with a mechanical arm is perched on his shoulder, tinkering with exposed wiring that should not be exposed at all. The warrior's tactical systems identify this orc as the immediate threat, the one causing the most damage to his systems, and suggest that eliminating him should be the first priority. The warrior agrees with this assessment. His consciousness flows through the neural interfaces, reconnecting with limbs he has not used in millennia, re-establishing control over a body that is not flesh, but ceramite and adamantium. It is a strange sensation, not quite like moving his original limbs, but not entirely foreign either. After so long in the sarcophagus, after so many centuries of being more machine than man, the Dreadnought feels more natural than any flesh and blood body ever did. His power fist moves first. The fingers that have been frozen for thousands of years suddenly clench shut with a speed that takes even the Orks by surprise. The mech boy on his shoulder barely has time to register what is happening before the power fist's energy field activates, surrounding the appendage in a crackling blue corona of disruptive force. The field's purpose is simple: disrupt the molecular bonds of whatever it touches, allowing the fist to tear through armor, flesh, and bone with equal ease. Sparkgit, to his credit, is quick thinking even in the face of impending doom. He throws himself backward, abandoning his tools and scrambling to get off the Dreadnought's shoulder before the power fist can reach him. He almost makes it. The fist catches him at the edge of its swing, the disruption field clipping his mechanical arm and sending him flying across the chamber with enough force to crack the wall when he hits it. The other orcs are slower to react, their brains taking precious seconds to process the fact that their loot has suddenly become dangerous. Those seconds cost them dearly. The warrior pivots at the waist, a movement that sends two more mech boys tumbling to the ground, and extends his assault cannon arm in a gesture that is both mechanical and oddly human. The weapon's barrels begin to rotate, building up speed, the characteristic whine of the weapon's motor filling the chamber. "It's awake!" someone shouts, probably one of the knobs, his voice cutting through the rising noise of the assault cannon. "Kill it before it kills us!" The orcs do what orcs do best when confronted with danger. They attack. Shooters and sluggers bark, sending a hail of bullets toward the Dreadnought from multiple directions. The rounds impact against ceramite armor that was built to withstand Lascanon fire, creating sparks and scorch marks but doing no meaningful damage. A few lucky shots find gaps in the plating, penetrating into the Dreadnought's internal systems, but the warrior barely notices. Pain is not something he experiences the way he once did. Damage to his chassis registers as data, status reports informing him that certain systems have been compromised, but there is no visceral sensation of injury, no agony to distract him from his purpose. The assault cannon reaches firing speed. The warrior's combat protocols select a firing solution, identifying which orcs pose the greatest threat and prioritizing them for elimination. Then he squeezes the trigger, an action that is not physical but mental, a thought that translates through the neural interfaces into mechanical action. The assault cannon speaks. It is not a sound that can be easily described. It is thunder and lightning combined, a continuous roar of explosive violence that fills the chamber and drowns out every other noise. The weapon fires 3,000 rounds per minute, each one a mass-reactive shell designed to penetrate armor before detonating, turning whatever is inside into a red mist. Against orcs, wearing minimal armor and standing in the open, the effect is devastating. The first burst tears through a group of boys who were standing too close together, the shells ripping them apart before they can scatter. Bodies explode, limbs fly through the air. Green blood paints the walls in abstract patterns that would be almost artistic if they were not so horrible. The orcs do not die quietly or peacefully. They scream and roar, their deaths violent and messy, their bodies reduced to components that are barely recognizable as having once been alive. But orcs are not creatures who flee from violence, no matter how overwhelming. If anything, the sudden carnage seems to excite them. triggering something primal in their psyche that makes them more dangerous rather than less. They charge the Dreadnought from all directions, firing as they come, swinging axes and chains and power claws at armor that is far too thick for their weapons to penetrate. They climb onto the warrior's legs, trying to reach vulnerable points, shouting war cries in their guttural language that promise all manner of violence if they can just get close enough to strike. The warrior does not speak. He has no words for these Xenos, no battle cries or challenges to offer. He simply kills them, methodically and efficiently, his assault cannons sweeping back and forth across the chamber like a scythe through wheat. When Orks get too close for the cannon to track them effectively, he switches to the power fist, grabbing them and crushing them, or throwing them into the walls with enough force to leave orc-shaped indentations in the rockcrete. The knob with the power claw manages to land a solid hit on the Dreadnought's leg, his weapon's energy field tearing through the outer layer of armor and exposing some of the hydraulic systems beneath. The warrior feels this as a loss of pressure in the affected limb, a reduction in mobility that his systems automatically compensate for by routing power to the other leg. He pivots toward the knob, who is winding up for another strike, and brings the power fist down in an overhead blow that catches the orc squarely on his head. The knob's skull, tough as it is, cannot withstand the impact. It collapses like an egg, the orc's body going limp instantly. But even as he fights, even as he kills with the mechanical efficiency that has been drilled into him through centuries of warfare, part of the warrior's mind is elsewhere. He is trying to understand what has happened, trying to piece together how he went from defending a fortress that he can barely remember to waking up surrounded by orcs in a chamber he does not recognize. His memory is fragmentary, full of holes and inconsistencies, but certain things are starting to become clear. The fortress has fallen. That much is obvious from the state of the vault, the layers of dust and corrosion that speak to decades, if not centuries, of abandonment. His chapter either retreated or was destroyed, leaving him behind in the chaos. No one came back for him. No tech marines to maintain his systems. No chaplains to provide counsel. No battle brothers to wake him when he was needed. He was forgotten, sealed away, and left to sleep until the end of time, or until someone broke in and disturbed him. The realization is bitter, but the warrior does not have time to process it emotionally. The orcs are still coming, still attacking, and his ammunition is not infinite. The assault cannon's ammo counter shows he has already burned through 2,000 rounds, approximately 40% of his total load. If this fight continues, he will run dry, and then he will be forced to rely solely on the power fist, a weapon that is devastatingly effective but requires him to close to melee range. He needs to end this quickly. The warrior activates his vox speakers, the first time he has attempted to vocalize since waking. What emerges is not the clear, authoritative voice he remembers having as a flesh and blood warrior. It is a mechanical rasp, synthesized and distorted, the sound of a machine trying to speak. But it is speech nonetheless, and it carries with it the weight of authority that comes from 10,000 years of imperial tradition. You are trespassing in a sacred space of the emperors. Astartes. Each word is punctuated by a burst from the assault cannon, shells tearing through whatever orc is unfortunate enough to be in the line of fire. Flee or be destroyed. The orcs do not flee, they never do. They respond with their own war cries, their challenges and boasts, their promises of what they will do when they finally bring down this metal Humi. They throw themselves at the Dreadnought with renewed enthusiasm, sensing that they are witnessing something special, a fight that will be worth bragging about if they survive. But they will not survive. The warrior has been fighting orcs for longer than most of them have been alive, has developed an almost instinctive understanding of their tactics and psychology. He knows that they will not retreat, that they will fight until the last one falls or until he is destroyed. So he gives them what they want: total, unrelenting violence, the kind of battle that orcs dream about when they sleep. The assault cannon continues its terrible work, sweeping across the chamber in controlled bursts that maximize carnage while conserving ammunition. The power fist crushes and throws, each motion economical and precise, wasting no energy on unnecessary flourishes. The warrior has become the perfect engine of destruction, a walking embodiment of the Emperor's wrath, his every action designed to kill as efficiently as possible. And slowly, inevitably, the tide of green bodies begins to thin. The orcs are numerous and tough, but they are not invincible. They die one by one, or in groups, their corpses piling up around the Dreadnaught's feet, their blood slicking the floor until it is treacherous to walk on. The few survivors, those who have somehow avoided being shot or crushed, begin to realize that they cannot win this fight, that they are facing something far beyond their ability to overcome. Sparkgit, still conscious despite his impact with the wall, watches the slaughter from his position on the floor. His mechanical arm is ruined, torn half off by the power fist's disruption field, sparking and useless. But he is alive, and he is already thinking about escape. The vault entrance is 20 meters away. If he can just get there, if he can make it back to the surface, he can warn the rest of the warband about what they found down here. The boss will want to know. The boss will probably want to come down here himself and fight this thing, because fighting big, scary, Humy war machines is exactly the sort of thing that orc war bosses live for. But first, Sparkgit has to survive the next few minutes. He begins to crawl, using his remaining arm to pull himself across the blood-slicked floor, moving as slowly and quietly as an orc can manage, which is not very quiet at all, but hopefully quiet enough that the Dreadnought will not notice him. Behind him, the sounds of battle continue, the roar of the assault cannon, the screams of dying orcs, the mechanical thunder of ceramite-clad feet striking the floor. But Sparkgit does not look back. He just focuses on the entrance, on getting through it and away from this nightmare they have unleashed. He is 10 meters from freedom when the assault cannon falls silent. The battle, Ancient Warrior versus Green Horde. The sudden quiet is almost worse than the noise. For several long seconds, the only sound in the vault is the heavy breathing of the few surviving orcs and the whir of the Dreadnaught's servos as it stands among the dead. The floor is carpeted with bodies, the walls painted with blood, and worse. The air smells of cordite and ozone, the burned metal scent of mass-reactive shells detonating in flesh. Of the 30 or so orcs who entered the vault, perhaps 5 still live, and all of those are wounded, bleeding from multiple injuries, shocked by the sheer ferocity of the warrior they have awakened. The Dreadnaught's assault cannon has run dry, its ammunition hopper empty, the barrels still glowing with heat from sustained fire. But the warrior does not need the cannon. He still has the power fist, still has his armored bulk, still has the determination that has kept him fighting for longer than most civilizations have existed. He turns slowly, optical sensors scanning the chamber for remaining threats, targeting reticles settling on each of the survivors in turn. One of the orcs, a particularly large knob, who has somehow avoided serious injury, decides that the best defense is a good offense. He charges the Dreadnought with a roar, his chopper raised above his head, ready to bring it down in a blow that might, with luck and the favor of Gork and Mork, damage something important. It is a brave charge, the kind of death that orcs consider honorable and worthy of remembrance. It is also futile. The warrior catches the chopper in mid-swing with his power fist, the energy field disrupting the crude metal of the blade and causing it to shatter into pieces. Before the knob can react, the fist closes around his torso, lifting him off the ground. The orc struggles, kicking and punching, but his blows accomplish nothing against ceramite armor. The power fist squeezes, and there is a wet cracking sound as the knob's spine snaps and his ribcage collapses. The warrior tosses the corpse aside and turns his attention to the next target. But the next target is already fleeing. Sparkgit has abandoned any pretense of stealth and is now running as fast as his injured state allows, dragging his ruined arm behind him, focused entirely on reaching the vault entrance. Behind him, he hears the heavy footfalls of the Dreadnought giving chase, each step covering more ground than an Ork can manage even when uninjured. He knows he will not make it. The math is simple and brutal, but he runs anyway. Because Orks do not give up, do not surrender, do not accept defeat even when it is inevitable. He is 5 meters from the entrance when the Dreadnought's power fist catches him by the leg, yanking him backward and lifting him into the air. Sparkgit finds himself face to face with the optical sensors of the Dreadnought, close enough to see his own reflection in the glowing lenses, close enough to feel the heat radiating from the war machine's systems. For a moment, they regard each other, the ancient warrior encased in his tomb of steel, and the Ork who was unlucky enough to disturb that tomb. "Please," Sparkgit says, and in that moment he is not speaking Orcish, but Low Gothic, the language dragged from his genetic memory in a desperate attempt to communicate with his captor. "Please, we didn't mean nothing by it. We was just looking for loot, that's all." The warrior does not respond immediately. His tactical systems suggest that he should simply crush this Xenos and be done with it, eliminate the threat, and secure the area. But something stops him. Some fragment of curiosity, or perhaps just the desire to understand what has happened while he slept. He engages his vox speakers, the mechanical rasp of his voice filling the chamber. "How long?" The words come slowly, forced through a vocalization system that was not designed for complex speech. "How long have I been here?" Sparkgit's eyes widen. He had not expected the Dreadnought to speak, had not expected anything beyond immediate violence. But Orks are nothing if not opportunistic. And if this Humie wants to talk instead of kill, Sparkgit is more than happy to oblige. "I dunno," he says, his ruined mechanical arm sparking as he gestures. "This place is old, real old, older than anything we've ever seen before. Could be hundreds of years, could be more. We ain't got no way to tell." "The fortress." The warrior's grip tightens slightly, drawing a pained grunt from Sparkgit. "What happened to it?" "It fell down," Sparkgit says, stating the obvious with typical Ork directness. "Nobody here when we arrived, just ruins and old stuff. We've been digging around for weeks, finding all sorts of good loot, used the best we found so far." He pauses, then adds with the kind of misplaced pride that only an Ork could muster. "We did a proper good job getting into your vault. Took a lot of boom to break them doors." The warrior processes this information, cross-referencing it against his corrupted memory logs. The pieces are starting to come together, forming a picture that is both clear and terrible. He has been abandoned, not through malice or betrayal, but through simple logistics and the inevitable chaos of war. His chapter evacuated the fortress, taking what they could carry, leaving behind what they could not. And he, sealed in a vault in the deepest level, slumbering in stasis, was either forgotten or deemed too difficult to retrieve in the time available. 5,750 years. The number from the chronometer haunts him, impossible to fully comprehend. He has lost more time than most species of the galaxy have existed. The Imperium he fought for may still exist, but it will have changed beyond recognition. The brothers he served with are dust. The enemies he fought are long dead, replaced by new threats and new wars. Everything he knew is gone, and he is a relic from an age that no longer exists. But he still lives, and where there is life, there is duty. You will leave. The warrior releases Sparkgit, letting the Ork fall to the floor in an undignified heap. "Go back to your warband. Tell them what you found here." Sparkgit stares up at the Dreadnought, trying to understand what is happening. Why is the Humie letting him live? It makes no sense. Humies do not show mercy to Orks. They kill them or are killed by them. That is the natural order of things. But he is not about to question his good fortune. He scrambles to his feet, nodding frantically. Yeah, I'll tell him. I'll tell the boss all about the big stompy thing in the vault. He'll probably want to come down here himself and have a proper scrap with you. Good. The warrior steps aside, clearing a path to the vault entrance. I will be waiting. Sparkgit does not need to be told twice. He runs, or hobbles as fast as his injuries allow, making for the entrance with the kind of speed that only imminent death can inspire. The other surviving orcs, seeing their mech making his escape, follow suit, abandoning their weapons and wounded in their haste to get away from the Dreadnought. Within moments, the vault is empty, except for the warrior and the dead. The Dreadnought stands alone in the chamber he has occupied for nearly 6 millennia, surrounded by the corpses of the Xenos who violated his rest. His assault cannon is empty, his power fist dripping with orc blood. His armor scarred by hundreds of impacts that will need to be repaired if he is to continue functioning effectively. But he is awake, he is mobile, and he has a purpose, even if that purpose is simply to make the orcs regret ever finding him. He moves to the vault entrance and looks out into the corridor beyond, where the orcs are already disappearing into the distance, their footsteps echoing through the ruins. The warrior considers pursuing them, running them down and eliminating the survivors before they can report what they have found. But he dismisses the idea. Let them run. Let them tell their war boss about the ancient guardian they have awakened. Let them bring reinforcements, more orcs for him to kill. Because that is what he does. That is all he has ever done. And if the galaxy has moved on without him, if everything he fought for is lost or changed beyond recognition, he will still serve. He will still fight. He will still defend humanity against the Xenos, the heretic, the demon, all the enemies that threaten the Imperium's existence. He is a Dreadnought of the Adeptus Astartes. He is a space marine, a warrior of the Emperor, a defender of humanity. And though he has slept for nearly 6,000 years, though he has been forgotten and abandoned, though he exists in an age that has no memory of him, he will not falter, he will not despair, he will not surrender, he will fight. The warrior turns back to the vault, his optical sensors scanning the interior. His assault cannon needs ammunition, his armor needs repair, his systems need maintenance that he cannot perform himself. But scattered among the orc corpses are the components they were in the process of looting: power cables, armor plates, tools, even a few intact bolt guns from the storage lockers. With time and effort, he might be able to salvage enough to make temporary repairs, to restore some of his combat effectiveness. He sets to work, his power fist delicately sorting through the debris, separating what is useful from what is not. It is strange work for a weapon designed to crush tanks, but the neural interfaces give him fine control when he needs it. He retrieves armor plates and begins the laborious process of welding them into place over the damaged sections of his chassis, using a plasma torch he finds among the orcs' abandoned tools. The welds are crude by Tech Marine standards, but they will hold well enough for now. The bolt guns are a more complicated problem. They are designed for human-sized hands, not for Dreadnought manipulators. But the warrior is nothing if not adaptable. He takes several of the weapons and begins modifying them, stripping out their firing mechanisms and ammunition feeds, jury-rigging them into a makeshift weapon that can mount where his assault cannon once sat. It will not be as effective as the original weapon. The rate of fire will be lower, the ammunition capacity significantly reduced, but it will give him a ranged option until he can find proper replacements. As he works, his mind drifts, reviewing what he knows and what he needs to learn. He is in the ruins of Fortress Galanthor, abandoned for unknown reasons, on a world whose name he cannot recall, in an age far removed from the one he remembers. The Orks have claimed this world, which means there must be a sizable warband somewhere on the surface. That warband will have a war boss, and that war boss will want to personally confront the warrior who killed so many of his boys. This suits the Dreadnought perfectly. Orks are predictable in their way. They value strength above all else, and they will keep attacking until either they win or they are all dead. This means he knows what is coming. More orcs, in greater numbers, probably with heavier weapons and more determined leadership. It will be a battle worthy of the name, the kind of fight that Space Marines train their entire lives to excel at. But first, he needs to prepare. He needs to recover as much of his combat effectiveness as possible, shore up his defenses, plan his approach to the battle that is surely coming. He is one warrior against what might be thousands of orcs. The odds are terrible. The chances of survival are minimal. Victory in any conventional sense is probably impossible. He does not care. He has been a Dreadnought for longer than he was ever a whole man. He has fought in battles where the odds were worse than this, where victory seemed impossible and defeat certain. And he has endured, survived, prevailed against enemies that should have destroyed him. He will do so again, or he will die trying. Either outcome is acceptable. Either outcome honors the service he has given. Hours pass as he works, time measured by the gradual improvement of his systems, the slow accumulation of repaired components and improvised solutions. When he is finished, when he has done everything he can with the resources available, the warrior reviews his status. His armor is patched but functional. His power fist is fully operational. His makeshift bolt gun mounting is crude but should work. His reactor is stable. His amniotic fluid is circulating properly. His neural interfaces are reading green across the board. He is as ready as he is going to get. The warrior moves to the vault entrance and looks out into the corridor, where the darkness seems to press in from all sides. Somewhere above, the orcs are regrouping, preparing, bringing their war boss to see the ancient guardian they have awakened. They will come with numbers, with enthusiasm, with weapons and warriors, and all the brutal strength that orcs can muster. And he will meet them, not because he has any hope of winning, not because he expects to be rescued or relieved, not because he believes that his sacrifice will mean anything in the grand scheme of the galaxy's endless wars, but because that is what he was made to do. Because duty does not end with death or even beyond it. Because in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is only war, and warriors like him who will fight it until time itself runs out. The warrior activates his Vox speakers one final time, his mechanical voice echoing through the empty ruins. Let them come. And then he walks forward into the darkness, ready for whatever comes next. Aftermath and implications. The story of what happened when orcs found a dreadnought that had been asleep for 5,750 years does not have a tidy ending, because in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there are no tidy endings. There are only new conflicts, new battles, new struggles that continue until one side or the other is destroyed. The warrior's awakening is not the conclusion of anything. It is merely the beginning of a new chapter in a war that has been raging since before the Imperium existed and will continue long after it falls. The Orks, true to their nature, did exactly what the warrior predicted they would do. Sparkgit made it back to the surface and reported to his war boss, a massive brute called Big Mech Zagdruk Iron Teeth, who immediately became obsessed with the idea of fighting the ancient Humi war machine. He gathered his most powerful nobs, his best-equipped boys, even summoned his own Deaf Dread and several killercans to provide support. Within 2 days of Sparkgit's escape, a force of over 200 orcs descended into the ruins of Fortress Galanthur, eager for a proper scrap. What they found was a warrior who had spent those 2 days preparing the battlefield. The Dreadnought had moved from the vault into the corridor system, identifying choke points and defensive positions, setting up crude traps using unexploded ordnance he found in the fortress's abandoned armory. He had scavenged more ammunition from storage lockers, found additional weapons to mount on his chassis, even located a sacred text from the fortress's chapel that reminded him of prayers he had not spoken in millennia. The battle that followed was everything the Orks could have hoped for, and worse than they could have imagined. The Dreadnought fought with the kind of tactical acumen that only centuries of experience can provide. using the confined corridors to funnel the Orks into kill zones where his weapons could inflict maximum casualties. He would fire a burst from his improvised bolt guns, fall back to a new position, fire again, constantly moving to prevent the Orks from overwhelming him through sheer numbers. Big Mech Zagdrach himself confronted the warrior in what the Orks would later describe as the best fight any of them had ever seen. The war boss was huge, even by Ork standards, nearly 3 meters tall and broad as a tank, wielding a power claw that could tear through armor plating and a shooter that fired explosive rounds the size of a human fist. He and the Dreadnought fought in a chamber that had once been the fortress's main hall, trading blows that would have destroyed lesser warriors, creating a spectacle of violence that the surviving Orks would talk about for years. In the end, the warrior prevailed, but only barely. His power fist crushed Zagdrach's skull after a battle that lasted nearly an hour, a grinding match of strength against strength where neither side would yield. But the victory cost him. His armor was breached in multiple places, his reactor running hot, his amniotic fluid contaminated with debris from damaged systems. When the remaining Orks finally retreated, abandoning the ruins after their war boss fell, the Dreadnought collapsed in the center of the hall, his systems shutting down one by one as he exhausted his remaining power reserves. That could have been the end of the story. The warrior, victorious but spent, dying slowly in the ruins of a forgotten fortress on a world no one cared about. But fate, or the Emperor's providence, had other plans. 3 weeks after the battle, an Imperial patrol ship entered the system on a routine survey mission. The world had been flagged for potential recolonization, its strategic value reassessed now that shipping lanes in the sector had shifted. The survey team detected Ork activity and investigated, finding the ruins of Fortress Galanthor and signs of recent combat. They discovered the Dreadnought in the main hall, his systems in emergency shutdown, but his reactor still functioning, still keeping the pilot alive. The Tech Marines who were called in to examine the Dreadnought could barely believe what they found. The chassis was ancient, a Castroferrum pattern that predated most of the Imperium's current Dreadnoughts. The pilot had been in stasis for nearly 6 millennia, longer than some chapters had existed. The damage he had sustained fighting the Orks was severe, but not irreparable. With proper care, with the application of sacred oils and the recitation of prayers of repair, he could be restored to full functionality. More importantly, the Tech Marines found his identity inscribed on the sarcophagus, a name and chapter designation that sent them scrambling to contact higher authorities. The warrior was not just any Dreadnought. He was a hero from the age immediately following the Horus Heresy, a veteran of battles that had passed into legend. His chapter no longer existed in its original form, having been reorganized and renamed several times over the millennia, but its successor chapters still honored the traditions and heroes of its founding. The Dreadnought was recovered, transported to the nearest Forge world, and painstakingly restored over the course of a year. When he next awoke, it was not in a forgotten tomb, but in a chapel dedicated to the chapter's fallen heroes. The Tech Marines explained what had happened, where he was, how long he had been asleep. They gave him a choice that Dreadnoughts are rarely offered. He could return to service in one of the successor chapters, joining their ranks as a revered ancient, or he could be honorably decommissioned, his sarcophagus placed in the chapter's halls of remembrance, where he could finally rest. The warrior's response was predictable to anyone who understood what it meant to be a space marine. He chose service. He would fight on, bearing the colors of a chapter he had never served, but which honored the legacy of the one he had. He would teach younger warriors the lessons he had learned across millennia of warfare. He would stand as a living link to an age that most believed was lost to history. But he would also carry with him the scars of his time in the tomb, the knowledge of how easily a hero can be forgotten, how casually history moves on without those who fought to shape it. He would remember the Orks who woke him, the battle in the ruins, the moment when he realized that everything he had known was gone. And he would remember that sometimes the only thing that matters is the willingness to fight on, even when there is no hope of victory, even when the war seems endless and pointless, even when you are the last one who remembers why you started fighting in the first place. The story of what happens when Orks find a dreadnought that has been asleep for 5,750 years is ultimately a story about the nature of the Imperium itself. It is a civilization built on the bones of fallen heroes, maintained through the sacrifice of warriors who give everything they have and are then forgotten. It is a machine that consumes lives and memories with equal appetite, grinding on through the centuries without pause or reflection. And yet, within that machine, there are individuals like the warrior in the Dreadnought who refuse to be consumed, who maintain their sense of self and purpose even when everything else has been taken from them. The Orks, for their part, learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of looting things they do not understand. The warband on that world was severely diminished by the battle with the Dreadnought, losing its war boss and many of its strongest fighters. The survivors eventually abandoned the planet and moved on to find easier pickings elsewhere. But they took the story with them, adding it to the endless catalogue of Ork legends about humies who just would not die, about ancient war machines that wake up angry, about the importance of hitting things harder before they hit you. And somewhere in the ruins of Fortress Galanthor, if you know where to look, you can still find evidence of what transpired in those dark corridors. The scorch marks from the Dreadnought's weapons, the dried pools of Ork blood, the scattered components of looted equipment, the vault where it all began, its doors blown open, its sacred space violated, but ultimately defended. These are the monuments to a battle that no one will remember, fought by warriors whose names will be forgotten, in service of an Imperium that may or may not have deserved their sacrifice. In the end, that is what the grim darkness of the 41st millennium means. It is not just the constant warfare, or the endless threats, or the horror of existence in a hostile galaxy. It is the knowledge that your sacrifice will probably not matter, that you will be forgotten, that the machine will grind on regardless of whether you lived or died. And yet, warriors like the Dreadnought fight anyway, not because they expect glory or even survival, but because that is what they were made to do, what they have chosen to be, what they will remain until their final destruction. And sometimes, just sometimes, that is enough. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the grimdark fate of a forgotten Dreadnought and the Orks who made the mistake of waking him, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Stories of Hammer for more Warhammer 40k lore, told in this atmospheric, immersive style. We explore the darkest corners of the 41st millennium, bringing you stories of heroes and horrors that most would rather forget. Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war and warriors who will fight it until the stars themselves go dark.